it just shows that Hornby have very carefully tooled up the different options for all the different members of the classes. Hello there, welcome back to the channel up here in the loft with the Weir Yard. I am Jenny Kirk. It's really great to see you. I hope I find you well today, and today we've got a review video of a model that Hornby very kindly sent over for review, and it's actually one which I already had a couple of examples of, but this particular livery has been one which I've always loved, actually going back all the way to Stepney as a locomotive appearing in one of the Thomas the Tank Engine books. So yes, you've guessed it. Today's review is one of the Terriers, the new Terriers from Hornby. It's not a new locomotive, it's been out for over a year now, but this particular livery is one which I'd not got round to getting until now. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how it shapes up on this model. And also don't forget to check out today's channel sponsors, Trinomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. And you can find them at the link in the description box down below, and also at tramfabrique.nl, where you'll find their UK stockist. Well, without further ado, let's take a really good look at this locomotive, one that I have so been looking forward to. This is the model that Hornby have very kindly sent over. It's the LB&SCR Terrier, but in what would have been its original livery, in that really quite attractive ochre colour. This particular example is number 40, Brighton. Now the locomotives, when new, were all given names of areas that the London and Brighton South Coast Railway serviced. Mostly they were places in London, but a few, such as Box Hill, were named after areas, and also, as you see here, Brighton was of course one of the major destinations for the LB&SCR Railway. Now this particular example, just to give a little bit of history, was the example that the LB&SCR sent to an exhibition in France, where it won a gold medal for its innovation. In fact, there were some spirited runs of this locomotive on the French main line, and apparently the performance was considered very impressive by the French when they saw it running. I mean, when we look at the model now, we see what is possibly quite an antiquated looking Victorian locomotive, but of course in its day it was very advanced, and such was the success of these locomotives that they survived right through in a good quantity, even to British Rail days. They had a very long and varied career, and some of them were sold out of service, finding further service elsewhere with other railway companies. And so, as you can imagine, there is a plethora of livery options available on these, and actually quite a few have been released by Hornby as they've brought out more and more production runs of these. I think at last count there's something like 12 different versions of the Terrier from Hornby. I could be wrong on that, but certainly I've seen multiple examples in this very eye-catching livery, as well as Kent and East Sussex Railway Blue. We've seen Great Western Railway Green, Western, Clevedon and Portishead Railway Green, and then also several examples for on the Isle of Wight and Southern Railway livery, British Railways livery, even South Eastern and Chatham Railway livery, and I believe in this current batch there's also London and South Western Railway. So really these locomotives did very much get around. And actually there was a number of examples made it all the way to Argentina, of all places, used in the construction, I believe, of the La Plata tramway, although the actual end fate of those locomotives isn't actually recorded anywhere. but it has to be said, it's probably safe to assume that they got scrapped. Several of these locomotives were also used by contractors during the building of the Great Central Railway, of all places, and the MOD too used a number which were bought from the LB&SCR, and they were used at various bases on the Montgomery Military Railway, and also they served at distilleries in Scotland as well. So they very, very much did get around. They were quite small but powerful. Now, the nickname Terrier actually comes from the barking noise that they tended to make through the exhaust. They were also nicknamed Rooters by some early staff, but I think Terrier actually stuck. And they're actually the A1 class. Some of them were rebuilt later on into A1X, and I believe that Hornby has catered for both different options in its tooling. And there are a number of other detail options that Hornby have also catered for, some of which will be on this particular model. Now, it comes in the pretty standard Hornby box. We've got their catalogue number R845 LB&SCR Terrier Brighton, number 40, and it's DCC ready, and this is with a 6-pin decoder socket. And I'm just going to show you this because I do have several examples. This particular one is R3781X, so as you can see, this came DCC fitted from the factory, and you can see the difference, really easy to see in the shop. Blue for DCC ready, red for DCC fitted, and of course the DCC fitted have the X at the end. One thing that I will say to you is that DCC fitting these can be quite tricky. Hornby produced their own proprietary 6-pin decoder. I say proprietary, the pins are the same, but it's made to an exacting specification to fit into locomotives such as these and the B2 Packet. And I'll warn you now, we are going to do a DCC fitting guide. I'm going to use a Trinomatic 6-pin decoder, but be warned, space in these is incredibly tight. So if you're a bit of a DCC novice, I would say go for the factory fitted version, quite simply for ease of use. Otherwise you are going to be very severely limited on choice of DCC decoders to go in. Now, it is quite easy to get these locomotives apart, but we'll come to that in the fitting guide towards the end of this. On the back of the box, we get a little bit about the history. So actually, some of what I've been saying is there on the back of the box. They were classified 0P by British Railways, but you know, they were stalwarts of a number of routes, not least the Hayling Island branch, because their very, very low axle weight meant that they posed no conceivable challenge to a very rickety bridge that was on that line. And that was one of the last stalwart hangouts for the class when they were in BR ownership. I believe quite a few have survived into preservation. I think Brighton may well be one of the preserved ones on the Isle of Wight, although not in this very, very pretty livery. Kent and East Sussex Railway has a number, Bluebell Railway has a number as well. Also, further afield, if you are in Canada, you can see one of these in the flesh, as Wadden has made it to the Canadian Railroad Museum. It was presented by British Railways, and it's there for you to go and see. I believe a number of expats have made sure that the locomotive at least does look its best. I'm not sure whether it's operational. I suspect not, but it does certainly look the part. So when we get it out of the box, what we can see is actually a really, really nice locomotive. I've done a comparison between the new Terrier and the old Terrier before now, and it's something that was a stalwart of the Hornby range for a great many years, and actually before them it was part of the Dapol range. It was a series of moulds that Hornby bought from Dapol in the 1990s, and actually it is credited with really saving the company during the period in the 1990s when they hadn't invested heavily in new tooling and were starting to get outpaced by new upstarts such as Bachmann, who had come into the market releasing all new tooled models and showed some of the older Hornby offerings as being rather tired. So they were able to turn around and put into production that Dapol Terrier, which was pretty good in its time. And so in the centenary year, one of the models that is available is Merton, which I believe was where the original Hornby factory was in London, which is why they've picked that name. But that is also in this livery and in the retro style box from the 1990s. Also included in the packaging is this small bag of user fitted, I think it's the vacuum pipe, air pipe and possibly steam heating pipe for going on the front of the model, and that's always easier to fit if you're not bothering with a front coupling. So not very much in the way of user fitted detail to add, but it is there. And on the underside of the model it's just possible to see the little holes just underneath, very unobtrusive, so if you don't fit them it doesn't matter, it doesn't show up, and they just slide straight on in there. There's a lot of really fine detail on this, it has to be said, and there's quite a weight as well. Those of you who are familiar with the original Terrier will know that it was a little bit plastic fantastic in places, with some very chunky handrails, chunky detail, all with quite thickly moulded plastic. And the wheels too had those very solid, obvious plastic centres. Not such with this. What we get here is a very finely tooled model. The wheels as well really do show a marked improvement over that original Terrier, and even when we go below the sole bar it really is nicely done. Now somebody's going to point out in the video, oh, your sandpipes look a bit battered. There is a reason for this. It's because I've already gone ahead and done the DCC fitting. So as I hold it in my hands, this locomotive is DCC fitted. But it came at a cost. What I found is that the sandpipes, they're moulded from a very springy metal, which is really good because it means that you can manipulate them very, very well. And on some of the other model liveries that Hornby have produced, that's not a problem whatsoever, because that dark, black, chemically blackened metal look works really well and stands up to abuse. Unfortunately, the red paint isn't as springy as the metal underneath, so what's happened is that the paint has quite literally just flaked off as it's been manipulated to get the chassis back on. So I will point that out. Out of the box, this model was pristine. I didn't take a picture. I thought, oh, I'll just do a test fit of the DCC fitting. And sometime later, after a lot of struggles, that's where we got to. One of the things that I've noticed though is you can see just down there underneath the boiler there's a bit of a gap, and this is the way that the chassis mounts into the rest of the body. It's not massively noticeable, but I do feel the need to point it out. Initially I thought that this might be a result of the DCC fitting that I did before I started the main body of this review. It is a tight fit in there, and I initially thought that maybe the wires were kind of just pushing it out of line ever so slightly. But when I've looked at some of the other examples, I can see here, this is actually that factory fitted one, so it's never been opened up to have a look inside by myself. And you can still see, if you go looking for it, that little line is there. The darker livery does hide it better, and I think one of the problems that this livery faces is it does really show in a very unforgiving way any gaps such as that. I also, into the mix, I've got this Southeastern and Chatham Railway version, and again you can see that line underneath there. But you know, one of those things, I guess model locomotives are always going to have some degree of a compromise to them to make them work in this scale, and that's the compromise that Hornby have chosen. It's just unfortunate that this livery is one that really does show that up once you find it, but it is in an unobtrusive place on the model. So from above, and that, I'm guessing quite a few people who've actually bought this model probably never noticed, so that's good enough for me. Looking to the rest of the model, we've got this turned metal. I'm not sure whether it actually is metal, but it looks metal. Actually, no, I think it is moulded plastic that's then painted, but it does seem to be pretty well done. We also don't have a seam around the base of the chimney, and I'm looking there very closely. I think it's interesting how they've done this. The entire chimney with the flared out base is a plug-in moulding. So actually the join between the chimney moulding and the boiler is very carefully hidden by the actual join on the flange of that flaring at the bottom. And that's really thoughtfully done. One of the other areas that I really do need to come to, because I know that there is another Terrier on the market, and it's an area that people have pointed out on that, and that's the back of the cab. And you can see on this, the way the cab is moulded, it doesn't have any line across the back there. Of course, the white on this model would again be another light colour, unforgiving of that. So that is something that Hornby have done reasonably well. Inside the cab though, this is an area which I picked up on when the models first came out. The glazing does feel a little bit of a retrograde step. We've seen with the W4 Peckets, just to name one example, just how nicely glazing can be done. And on this, it just seems like there's a bar of clear glazing that goes across the back there. And I'm just looking there quite closely, and you can see it. It's not obvious, but it is there. And again, if I turn the locomotive round, we can see there's this bar of clear glazing running across the entire back of the cab. Of course, from the outside, which is where you'd normally look at these, it does give a really nice effect. But on the inside, it's the shine really more than anything else. And it is possible to do flush glazing both inside and out, and it's just one of those areas where it felt to me that this model perhaps still had a little bit of room for improvement. The rest of the livery application really is nicely done. The lettering is sharp, and you've got that kind of shadowing effect in multicolours, and it really does work well. Unique to this model, we've got the thing about the gold medal winning, and it is perfectly legible. We've also got the locomotive number 40 on the back there. Of course, as these locomotives got older, the numbers changed. I believe a 6 was added in front later on in their life. And then, of course, another 2 was added when they went into Southern Railway stock. And a 3 was added to the front of that when they went into BR stock, with, of course, other little differences when they passed through other railway companies. The steps on the bottom, these feel like metal, and they are actually really quite strong. I really do like that. The number of locomotives I've come up against where the steps just ping off because they're only glued on with what amounts to super glue, and I'm afraid that super glue bonding metal to metal doesn't really work. But with this model, it does feel like that is really nicely in there. The couplings we've got them in NEM pockets front and back, so unlike its predecessor, these are perfectly capable of taking alternative couplings such as KDs, and there's a lot of scope there. Across the top of the boiler, the finesse of the mouldings is really nicely done. We've got the rivets on there. They are actually quite prominent, but I think it works. Sometimes it's one of the things I do say. In model form, sometimes you have to make things a bit more prominent to look right. If they're scale, you probably wouldn't see them. And we've got a lot more finer detail, and particularly these on the top of the dome, I'm assuming that they are probably something to do with the safety valves. These are so much finer than the original version of the Terrier, where they were just horrible chunky plastic. Hornby have tooled up for both the A1 and A1X versions, and this does appear to conform to the appropriate version of the Terrier. I'm just going to look through the other ones I've got. That's got the same front, as has that. So I think that I've got 3 A1 class here. I'm not entirely sure, although that may not actually be the difference between A1 and A1X. We've also got the Westinghouse air pump on the side there. Again, a feature a lot of the pre-grouping Southern Railway region locomotive companies did make use of. So you can see the LB&SCR livery version also has that. But interestingly, not all members of the class carried it. Certainly this Kent and East Sussex Railway version correctly doesn't have that air pump, and it's just one example of the detail differences that Hornby has available. You can also see the difference in the coal greedy rails, and the protection on the back of the cab windows is there on that one, which isn't on this. And it just shows that Hornby have very carefully tooled up the different options for all the different members of the classes. The buffers as well are an area which on the previous version of the Terrier were really quite sadly lacking. I seem to recall that they never really lined up to anything else, and they were like a solid plastic moulding which had a habit of falling off. On these, the buffers do look really nice and solid. They are turned metal, although they aren't sprung, but actually it's not really a huge problem. The front face captures that look of the Terrier really, really well. And I'm just squinting down there, and the funnel chimney is absolutely perpendicular. And we don't seem to have any issues with twists in the running plate. I know that this has been an area which people have commented on other models about, but the Terrier, when I look across the three different versions that I've got, everything is straight and true and where it really should be. So quite pleased with that. This ochre finish is really, really nicely done. I do love it. I think Hornby have got the colour perfect. And one of the areas I want to talk to you about is, I'm going to turn it over actually because the connecting rods are kind of masking it. On this livery, one of the little quirks was that the wheel balance weights were painted to look like the spokes went all the way to the edge of the wheel. And it's very, very peculiar, but it is prototypically accurate. You can see there the LB&SCR version, they've made no pretense at that, and it's very interestingly captured by Hornby, and it just shows that attention to detail. I don't remember any effort being put in to do that on the previous version. Other areas which Hornby have done really well, these very peculiar, I think they're large wooden brake blocks, are done really well. I think that there is an option for the later style brake blocks, but all three of these are carrying the early style brake blocks, so I don't have any means to compare. Looking again into the cab, we've got a lot of backhead detail there, but it does feel to me that there's a bit of a detraction with that solid glazing bar. We also have on this model a representation of the condensing pipes. These locomotives were originally built with condensing apparatus, but that was removed from members of the class later in their life, and you can see there again the difference between this and the LB&SCR model in that those are correctly missing from the alternative versions. All in all, this is a really pleasing package. It runs really, really well. I set off initially on the DCC Concepts Rolling Road. This is a new feature to the reviews, which I'm hoping to continue with, and it does mean that I am now able to show you just how well some of these models run on DC. I had it running for about an hour, half an hour in each direction, and actually it was silky smooth out of the box. I didn't really experience too much of a problem. There was an initial glitch where it appeared that, or at least one of the wipers on the backs of the wheels wasn't quite bent far enough, but it was an easy fix. And once I'd done that, the locomotive did perform faultlessly on the rolling road. And that brings us neatly to the DCC Fitting Guide. Now, I've chosen to fit into this locomotive the Trinomatic Micro 6-pin wired decoder. And we're going to put up on screen a picture of that from the tramfabric.nl website, which is the UK stockists of these. I will warn you that this DCC fitting is not for the faint-hearted. If you're the kind of person who just wants to fit and forget, you're not too interested in features, and you really don't want any aggro, just buy the DCC fitted version that comes straight from Hornby. You will save yourself a lot of aggro. If you really do want to fit it yourself, then obviously the most practical version is probably to buy the Hornby DCC decoder, which is designed to fit in this locomotive in particular. But that does kind of negate the purpose of buying the locomotive and chip separately. Why would you do that when you can get them fitted direct from Hornby? This particular example came factory fitted, and I have to say I've experienced no problems whatsoever with it, so it does seem to do exactly what it says on the tin. But I promised you a DCC fitting guide, so that's what you're going to get, and we're going to be using that Trinomatic decoder. The space is really tight in here. If you want to fit sound or a stay alive, I'm afraid that this is not the Terrier for you. There really is no space inside this locomotive to accommodate any of that, and you really will be on a hiding to nothing if that's the route you want to go. I'm really sorry, but that's just the way it is, and what I found is that there's no space inside here to really allow any kind of creativity to be able to fit any of that. First things first, flathead screwdriver underneath the front coupling, and very carefully lever that out so you don't damage that tail. Put that to one side, and that exposes the screw underneath the buffer beam. The next one that we want is the small crosshead screwdriver, and we're going to undo the front one, and we're going to just carefully put that to one side so we don't lose it. And then this screw here, which is visible straight off the bat just in front of the coupling, and again, and I warn you now, these two screws aren't quite the same length, so very difficult to show. You may just be able to see there that the one that came out of the back just there is slightly longer. Don't get them mixed up, because you will get them you'll get problems putting this back together afterwards, with one screw protruding and not being able to tighten properly at the front, and one which doesn't really grip at the back. The entire chassis then just wiggles free and slides out, and there we go. Looking to the inside of the body, there's a lot of cast metal parts in here, and it really is quite nice how it's been put together. There isn't any space in the tank sides to get creative with things like really tiny speakers or stay alives, or indeed even to house the DCC decoder. So I'm warning you now, this is not a locomotive that really rewards the kind of person who wants to go sound fitted. The front part of the boiler here, as you can see, that's where we had that gap that was visible from the outside. And the lower half of the boiler, you can see that underneath the motor and the DCC decoder area. It is nicely done, it is all body colour finished, and it really is nice. These sandpipes, they came red, and out of the box they were perfectly red. But as you can see, the paint has a habit of flaking off. The reason for this is that this is a very, very flexible metal, but the paint is not equally as flexible. And it has to be said that it would probably be improved at this point to just remove all the red paint, because unless you're going to be able to touch that up afterwards, it's always going to look a bit odd. And that is a little bit of a minor detraction. Now I'm just going to put that to one side. And then what we see on the front here is the micro Trinomatic 6-pin decoder. Don't get the normal one because it is a bigger form factor, and believe me, you will never fit it in here. I'm going to pull this out. The little piece of tape is just to keep things neat. And what you will notice once all this is out is your 6-pin decoder is in a little clip there, and the actual plug just plugs into it. Your orange wire is pin 1, and that is this side, so it does plug in neatly, and by having this small plug with the wiring loom, it doesn't protrude beyond the front here. Believe me, there is no room inside the body beyond that point. There's also no room above here for any of the wire or a decoder. This fits very snugly up inside the body. I've also investigated, and there is no real space at the back here either, so you can't even get a decoder into that space. It really is a tight fit, and you have to be very careful. The micro decoder from Trinomatic does come with quite a long wiring loom. What I would say is, had I had available the one with the bare wiring loom that you solder on yourself, I would have probably gone for a hard wire of this locomotive. We need to make really good use of the space, so loop the wire round underneath the DCC plug, round again, loop it under again. The idea behind this is we want to put this wire in every available space that we can put it in to avoid it from causing an issue with the actual fitting. The chip then sits neatly on top, and I've used just a little bit of tape to hold that wire from trying to go over the side of the boiler barrel. It's very important at this stage, don't cover the decoder with tape because you will cause it to overheat. Make sure that any little bits of wire that are trying to make a break for freedom are carefully tucked in. And then that decoder will just fit, and I mean just fit. Very carefully now, we feed it in, and you want to try and get those sanding pipes to go over the brake rigging at the front there, and then just very gently find its place. At this stage, you want to just check down there, and you can see that wiring is making a bid to stick out through that gap. So just very carefully feed that all in. Don't scratch the paint. The other side looks good. And one of the other things as well, what you may find useful here is a set of tweezers. And there is a pipe, one on either side. It's quite springy, but it has this nasty habit of getting tucked in. And that's probably what's pulling those wires out. That's so much better. There we are. And a little pair of tweezers such as these, you can just tweak it out. The other side hasn't jammed, so we're good. Looking to the underneath, we need to make sure that these sanding pipes are in the right place. So there and there. They are very springy, you can manipulate them, but that's when the paint just flakes off. Again, to the back, we need to grab hold of them, tweak them, and you can see the paint just flaking off. It is a little bit of an issue. Once that's in the right place, find the screw holes and then just slowly try and get it in position. If it doesn't go into position first time, I'm afraid it's because the chip has moved, and this is what I mean about it being very unforgiving. Let's get these screws in just to hold it. Slight magnetism on the screwdriver is very helpful for this. Don't over tighten them, you'll strip the thread, and then you really will have a problem with this locomotive, simply because the springiness in those wires will forever push the body off. And there we have it, coupling back in. Oh, and we also want to just tweak these. So again, it's what I always said, these, the fact that they're springy is great. Those are in place. If you don't do this, they will get caught up in your motion and will cause very poor running. So you have to be very careful. And they do tend to just spring into the right place. But as you see, that red paint is not the best with the springiness. I'd rather have them springy and black than red and not springy, because they will snap. And that's how you DCC fit this model. And that brings us to the scores. Now, first up is finish, and I'm really pleased with the finish that Hornby have got on this. The ochre is perfect in my eyes and really does make this an incredibly beautiful model. We've also got all that printing, for example the Brighton, with that shadowing effect that really does make that lettering jump out at you as it should. The extra embellishments such as the gold medal winning stuff on there from the 1878 exhibition, and all of that really fine lining. I couldn't find any issues with the lining going where it shouldn't, or be squidgy or not quite line up. And the lining does extend to the running board, the steps, the toolbox. Everything that should be lined is lined. I particularly like this effect with the spokes on the wheels, just like the real locomotive. It is that kind of attention to detail that really does bring this locomotive alive. And I've got no hesitation to give this locomotive a 9.5. Turning to functionality, out of the box it ran pretty well on DC, and no real qualms about that bent pickup. It's one of those things, a lot of locomotives get that, where they don't quite touch the back of the wheel with all of the sideways travel of the wheel itself. And it's an easy fix. I've had to do it for locomotives for lots of different manufacturers, so I'm not going to let that affect the score, because I think that that would be disingenuous to do so. On DCC, it did everything that was asked of it. The pulling power too was pretty prototypically correct. It just romped around the layout, pulling a short train, and showed no difficulties in doing so, so I was more than happy with its performance. All in all, I think that adds up to a pretty respectable 9.8 out of 10. When it came to ease of use, that Dcc Fitting, that's where things really got tough, and there were elements of disappointment for me there. When you get inside this locomotive, and it is easy enough to get inside, I felt that there was just no real room in there. Of course, the caveat is that Hornby's own DCC decoder, which is designed to fit, does so pretty reasonably and pretty easily. But if you want to go for anything slightly more exotic, such as sound, stay alive, or firebox flicker, working lights, all of those things, there really is no room to play with. It was hard enough to use a non-Hornby decoder on this model, and I think that if you want all of that DCC trickery, then really you are going to struggle with this model. That said, if you just want a locomotive that just romps around your layout silently, day in, day out, reliably, then this locomotive does fit the bill. So I'm going to give this a 6.1 out of 10. On aesthetics, this locomotive does seem to have captured the look of the real thing very, very well. One of the areas that for me let it down is that glazing bar in the cab, front and back. It is, however, an easy fix. If Hornby wished to take on board the criticism, I could well see that the next batch of this model would come out with that fixed, and it really would up the game a great deal. The hexagonal nuts on the wheel do seem slightly over large, but they are a standard size from Hornby, and I guess that that's a compromise to ease maintenance, and they do sell a tool that will allow you to take these off and put them back on if for whatever reason you need to do so. Other areas I felt that let it down is that gap just along there where the top part of the model slides away from the chassis for gaining access to the inside. And it does show up particularly badly on this livery, but it's not really a deal breaker for me, so I'm quite happy to give this an 8.8 out of 10. When it comes to value for money, that's an area where this model really does shine. For me, Hornby have brought out pretty much every livery you can imagine, and in some cases multiple different identities. So for example, in this ochre livery, they've brought out Brighton, also Leadenhall, Merton has come out as well. So there are plenty of different options if you wish to populate a layout. They're also so pretty that I can well believe that a lot of these will end up in display cabinets or the because it's my railway category, and at the price that they're available at, they're actually pretty affordable. When Hornby brought out this new version of the Terrier, they actually kept it to the original RRP of the older tooled model, so there was no price inflation between this and the previous version. That means that brand new you can source these for between £80 and £85, and if you shop around, I've seen them down to around £69 in sales here and there But it's a case of, at that price, get them whilst you can, because I can't imagine such well-priced locomotives are going to hang around indefinitely. I must admit that this is a model whose beauty has actually won me over, and I'm already starting to look online for a copy of Leadenhall. I really do want to add to my LB&SCR ochre fleet, and I think that these are just the locomotives to do it. So I have no hesitation to give this a 9.9 for value for money. And that gives us an all-in-all total of a very healthy and respectable 44.1 out of 50 for the Hornby Terrier model. Well, I hope you found that informative. Don't forget to tickle that like button, and also you'll find some links down below that will take you to a model shop where we believe you can pick up these models at a really favourable price. Don't forget as well to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and also, probably most importantly, don't forget to share this video too. Put it out there on all social media channels. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take really great care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you again then. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trinomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian Smith, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Trish Bits, Sparky 107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, and Robert Sears, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grant Line Products. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.